Welcome back to Motion Recap. Today, we are going to explain an American post-apocalyptic thriller film called Vanishing on the 7th Street. Watch out for spoilers and take care. The film begins in a theater where a large crowd is watching a film. Paul, the projectionist, is in the adjacent room in charge of the projections. He's wearing a headlamp to aid him in navigating the dark cinema hall. Paul is a voracious reader who enjoys reading while at work. We see him reading a book titled The Lost Colony of Roanoke, in which the inhabitants of a town mysteriously vanish. When he rises to push some buttons on the control panel, the lights go out, completely darkening the theater. Paul is fortunate to have his headlamp, which he uses to navigate his way inside the theater room. However, to his surprise, the area that was densely populated just seconds ago is now completely deserted. He sprints down the corridor, calling out to his colleagues. He is heard by a guard with a torchlight who is equally perplexed. The two then proceed to search the area for people. The guard notices someone in a dark corner and approaches them, but his torchlight goes out in the middle of his approach. When Paul returns his gaze, the guard has vanished and his clothes have fallen to the floor. In another hospital, a nurse named Rosemary is distraught over a similar occurrence. The room is dark and deserted except for her. She walks down the hallway, torchlight in hand, but discovers no one. Rosemary walks into the operating room and discovers a patient on the bed. His body has been cut as if the surgeons abandoned him in the middle of the operation. Suddenly, the room's lights dim and the patient vanishes. Rosemary, terrified, begins searching for her infant Manny. The following morning, Luke Ryder, a television reporter, awakens to discover his partner has not returned home. He blows out the candles on his side table, which is likely why he hasn't vanished with the others. Luke also notices that his phone's battery is running low and the power is out. Ignoring everything, he dresses and goes outside, only to discover abandoned cars and clothing on the streets. He begins looking around, perplexed, and witnesses a nearby plane crash. Uncertain of what to do, he rushes to his job and discovers a similar situation. Throughout this time, he is unaware of a subtle shadow following him. Luke discovers that the power is out in his entire building, including his office, and that none of the phones work. He then examines a photograph of himself and his girlfriend when his attention is drawn to a shadow outside the room. Following Luke's departure, we see darkness take over the frame. Luke is in the street 72 hours after the first disappearance, attempting to start a car. Suddenly, a man knocks on the window, pleading for assistance. He is holding a non-functioning lighter in his hands. Luke locks the doors and relinquishes control of the man to the shadow. Within seconds, the poor man vanishes, leaving only his clothes behind. After witnessing the man's demise, Luke continues his search for a working car. A small child with a torchlight observes him from nearby, but he is unaware of her. Luke discovers a car with its headlights on but no engine. Finally, he comes across a well-lit pub in the next block. He quickly enters but notices no one else. Additionally, the bar's floor is littered with people's clothing. He then pours himself a glass of alcohol to help him relax. He reaches the basement in search of the source of power. It is equipped with a backup generator that illuminates the entire structure, but to his dismay, it is about to run out of fuel. Suddenly, a 12-year-old boy named James brandishes a rifle at him. He motions Luke to put down his torch and escorts him upstairs. James is fearful of Luke due to his unfamiliarity, but Luke assures the child that he will not harm him. James finally puts the gun down and makes his introduction. He reveals himself to be the pub's proprietor's son. He and his mother were the only survivors following the initial disappearance. His mother has gone to a nearby church to seek assistance, and James is waiting for her to return. Luke chooses to be straightforward with the child and informs him that it is still dark outside at 11 a.m. The sun has been rising late and setting early since the first disappearance. They will lose sunlight in a few days, and the chances of James' mother returning are extremely slim. James is unconvinced and insists on waiting until she arrives. Luke attempts to persuade James to accompany him if he wishes to survive. James, on the other hand, is adamant in his decision. A short time later, the nurse Rosemary storms into the pub, frantic to locate her missing child Manny. She accuses the other two of kidnapping Manny and demands they return him. After that, the lady goes insane and brandishes a gun at the two. She regains her composure only after firing a shot at the counter. Paul, the projectionist, is somewhere nearby, meandering through the dark street. He is mere seconds away from being swallowed by darkness when he comes to a well-lit bus stop and is rescued. He is, however, gravely injured and unable to move. James reassures Rosemary and offers her some water when they return to the pub. The woman claims to be in search of her 9-month-old son Manny. The film cuts to a flashback in which we see Rosemary taking a smoke break in the hospital. Suddenly, the lights go out, followed by the sound of a car crash. She is rescued due to the lighter she was holding. She survives the night and returns to her house the following morning. There, she ascends to her room's crib, hoping to see her baby, only to discover he is missing. Returning to the present, Rosemary extracts glow sticks from her bag, which she has been utilizing to stay alive. While they are conversing, a loud scream from the outside draws their attention. They debate whether or not to search for survivors. Luke is hesitant to take the risk, but the other two insist that he rescue the individual. Finally, Luke searches and discovers an injured Paul at the bus stop. They hear whispers coming from the shadow as it approaches. Luke manages to drive Paul to the pub, endangering his life. Paul is assisted by Rosemary, who dresses his wound. He regains consciousness a short time later and begins explaining how he got there. According to Paul, he was safe after everything went dark because of his headlamp. However, after a few minutes, it ceased to function and he was struck on the head by someone. The shadows quickly overtook him and dragged him into the void. They whispered in Paul's ear, compelling him to plead for assistance. However, his headlamp reactivated at that point and he was back on the streets. Paul made his way to the bus stop where Luke discovered him. When questioned about the individual who struck him, Paul states that there was no body or face. It was merely a shadow. Rosemary, a devout Catholic, informs them that they have been abandoned by God as a punishment. Luke responds that there is no God and that they are unworthy of this punishment. The lights flicker once more, and they descend to the basement to inspect the backup generator. While Luke is repairing the generator, Paul informs them of a book he read earlier about the lost colony of Roanoke. He explains that in 1587, residents of the Roanoke Island colony mysteriously vanished overnight. The rest of the world was unaware until a boat carrying supplies arrived and the workers discovered the island was deserted. The inhabitants had left their food, livestock, and clothing in their current state. They left only the word Croatoan scrawled on a metal fence. Luke inquires as to the meaning of the word, but Paul maintains that it is a mystery. Paul begins kicking the generator out of frustration and injures himself. The others then bring him and keep him on the pool table. Rosemary requests that Luke obtain ice for the injured. While obtaining those, Luke recalls his last visit to his office. He is in the broadcasting studio, where he discovers the previous newscast. While speaking, the female reporter vanishes into thin air. Following that, a live feed from Chicago television broadcasts is played. A person warns everyone to always carry a light with them. He asserts that darkness can take on any shape or form in order to lure you to your death, emphasizing the importance of trusting only the light. Back in the present, Luke comes up with a plan to escape the situation. If he is able to make his way to Chicago, they can meet the other survivors and decide what to do next. He recalls the working truck he encountered earlier and suggests that the vehicle be retrieved. Given the generator's vulnerability to failure, they should instead use it to start the vehicle and drive away from the scene. Rosemary is skeptical of the notion, believing that everything is occurring for a reason. However, Luke convinces her to join the plan. They agree that James should stay with Paul and look after him while Rosemary and Luke go retrieve the vehicle. Rosemary and Luke eventually make their way to the truck and begin pushing it back to the pub. Simultaneously, Paul begins interrogating James about various aspects of his life. He is gradually losing consciousness, but James implores him to maintain consciousness. He approaches James and requests that he play a song that they both enjoy. James begins visualizing the crowded bar and relishes the fantasy in the midst of the mayhem. He is only recalled when Paul requests that he fetch him some water. James goes to the sink to retrieve it, but the lights suddenly flicker and go out. Luke and Rosemary take a break from pushing the vehicle somewhere else. Luke informs her about his ex-wife, Anna, who is currently residing in Chicago. While they are conversing, they notice a small child holding a torchlight in the distance. This is the same girl who was previously watching Luke while he was on the road. They attempt to approach her, but the little girl flees. Luke follows her and comes dangerously close to being engulfed by the shadows, but is saved at the last moment by the truck's headlight. In the subsequent scene, Paul rises and searches for James, only to discover his clothing on the floor. As he ascends to the basement, he notices a door leading to a well-lit tunnel. He continues inside, searching for James, but comes to a stalemate. The lights begin to dim spontaneously, and he is quickly engulfed in shadows. However, it is revealed that Paul's clothing is on the pool table. His journey to the tunnel was purely a dream. Paul was actually unconscious and was snatched from the pool table by the shadows. James quickly returns to Paul and notices that he is left, and sees that it is Paul who is naked. Meanwhile, Luke and Rosemary's torchlights begin to run out of batteries simultaneously. Luke attempts to ignite the fuel in order to generate light, but they are without a lighter. As a result, the two travel to a nearby hospital in search of any source of light. Luke starts a fire there using a matchstick and a cloth. Rosemary goes in search of rubbing alcohol to use as fuel. However, on her way, she overhears a baby crying and notices a stroller parked directly beneath a streetlight. Rosemary approaches the stroller, unaware that the shadow is luring her in. She notices the stroller is empty, but it is too late. She has been snatched away by the shadows. Luke, now alone, manages to return to the pub with the truck. He rejoins James, and the two board the truck on their way to Chicago. Luke starts the engine with the backup generator, and the two finally drive away. They are soon confronted with an accident that occurs directly in front of a church. James is adamant that he must enter to look for his mother. James enters the church despite Luke's warning to stay in the car. At that precise moment, Luke notices the word Croton carved into a road sign. He returns to James and saves him just in time before the shadows catch up with him. Luke then requests the child's return, but is once again ignored. James asserts that his mother is nearby after hearing her call him, unaware that the call was a trap set by the shadows. The car's headlights abruptly dim and Luke vanishes into thin air. James is now the sole survivor. He sits in between the church's lit candles, but they all slowly extinguish. The sun finally rises the following morning. Surprisingly, James survived the night and is currently sleeping in the same location as yesterday. Brianna, the little girl from earlier, approaches him. She demonstrates to James the solar flashlight she has been using to stay alive. Both of them later emerge from the church and notice a horse in the middle of the road. The two mount their horse and begin their journey, which is presumably to a safe location. Soon after sunset, we see Luke, Rosemary, and Paul's shadows watching over the children. Brianna and James continue their journey at the end of the film. Subscribe to more videos like this and turn on notifications to never miss any of our recap.